that was an interesting one because there's all of you are really dealing with some really interesting layers of history. It makes me think of if you've read Dolores Hayden's The Power of Place and how she looks at looking at cultural identity in urban spaces and looking at sort of layers of ethnic communities. It's really interesting to see this sort of the onion skin peel back, and especially with your work looking at Okinawa, looking at how it's. I mean, you're finding some really interesting threads. But I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about the history.
Well, the archaeology. I mean, I think that's part of the history and the investigation part that never ends. We were speaking earlier today on the English. My mother's side of the family, her maiden name's Taylor, and then her mom's maiden name is Philly. They're very British names. And the English currency we have "In God We Trust," right? And theirs has "Standing on the Shoulders of Giants." And I think that's an appropriate way to think about art. You cannot make art in a bubble. You cannot possibly communicate to people without having some kind of cultural clues, some kind of reference that you're relying on in order to convey your idea. So I think that not only I'm digging into something very personal, which I think everyone understands the idea of loss of culture, or has lost someone that they love, or discover something new about themselves or their family, and being able to do that investigation for yourself through, and visually I'm thinking about archaeology and with earth and landscape, but being able to portray it emotionally. I think in an image or a painting or a play, or being able to touch that personal part, so that you have the analytical, the history, the research, all of that goes into that idea of archaeology. But I think the way that it manifests is much more a personal, kind of emotional experience, hopefully for the viewer.
So Dmae, you talked in this email exchange recently betweenness a lot, and really the struggle for acceptance and identity. Is your use of family history a way for you to kind of peel that back and expose that?
I don't know. I mean, I think for me it starts as a personal way of figuring out life, figuring out who I am, and figuring out identity. I don't consider myself having a lot of onion skin. I mean, my work is what it is. I don't really do symbols. I'm a very direct person, so I either tell it like it is, or I kind of I'm quiet. So so I feel like those are my choices. Either I jump in, or I do what I have to do. So regarding that, I often do feel like in order to understand it myself, I feel like when I do produce work, hopefully it will make other people understand too, And I've had this conversation with a lot of mixed race peoples that you're often a bridge builder, bridge walker. You are the bridge between all these different cultures, these different races. And sometimes you feel like walking that bridge, because it can be kind of narrow and you can fall off a lot. But most of the time, it's really interesting to me how often I'm looked at like, well, would you explain this to this person, or would you explain this to this community? And I often feel like I'm sort of in the middle of all that. I was with my parents, I was the mediator when they were, fighting a lot. So I think that has been a role that I feel pretty comfortable with most of the time. And I think that's been my work, translator, interpreter, bridge builder, and whatever form that takes. But then sometimes you don't feel like it either, and I have to stress that. It's like I don't consider myself political or an activist, and yet other people, a lot of my work that. So, it's just what I have to do. Somebody has to, and I felt like I needed to, especially growing up in Oregon and living in Oregon. Because if you don't, often it just doesn't happen, right? We each have to make that choice. But I also think that, having that role can be heavy, and sometimes I just want to, write something that's totally frivolous, just like anybody else, or not pay attention to race, You know, it's just whatever I feel like writing that day. But, you know, you can also get a backlash from that too. I remember I wrote a series of really, you know, socially relevant plays for a while in my own personal history, and also this play about art called Picasso in the Back Seat that won the Oregon Book Award. And I then afterwards just felt like I want to do something fun, so I wrote this comedy mystery thriller with this magician named Buck Tanaka and, you know, Janie Bigo, who was Amerasian trying to find her father, and it was, you know, it was a play with music, and people just didn't, you know, Asians loved it, you know, Hapas loved it, but the mainstream community thought, oh, this isn't serious, you know, you're supposed to teach us something, you're supposed to, you know, you're supposed to do something socially relevant so we can understand your cultures, you know. So, yeah, it got really panned. But, you know, all the theater companies loved it, the Asian theater companies. Like, oh, I want to do that show. So, because it was fun, right? It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to teach people now about history.
Can I respond to that? Because I think that's really important. I started this out. I'm going to retract my words. No, you know, it's saying the word Hapa isn't something that I deal with all the time because it's primarily used by Asian Americans. Right? And I don't live in an Asian American community. But I think it's important to be able to write plays that are and plays that are really funny about the same issues, because it's important for us to be able to identify ourselves and not have a term placed upon you that you decide that you're going to use or try to have people understand in a specific way, that you get to choose how you want to be represented, and I think that's really important.
So, Dmae, I'm going to ask you this, and then I'm going to ask, I'll actually kind of go down the line here, but was there a sort of pivotal moment because you've written a lot of plays, you've done radio for years, was there a pivotal moment where identity became more important to you or became a more central piece in what you're doing?
It was Mei Mei. That was the piece, my first Peabody was Mei Mei, A Daughter's Song, and that was in 1989, and it was the same year that Joy Luck Club came out. And before then, I didn't know what to call myself, really. You know, I didn't. And that was my way of understanding who I was. And it was the most painful, most self-revealing, most personal piece and ever probably will do, because it was just so hard to do. My mother and I went back to Taiwan. We had a lot of fighting all the time. And we spent a month together in Taiwan, and we just like fought all the time, and I recorded it. So and it was therapy, you know, it was my way to understand her and our culture and la 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 la. And you know, I did this magnificent production. She wouldn't talk to me after that. It's like, how dare you show the world, right? How dare you show the world I can't speak English right, or, you know, I'm a dirty Taiwanese, how dare you? And she didn't speak to me for 4 years after that. I mean, it was horrible. So you know, you put yourself out there, and then, what was the question?
Well, the question was there a pivotal moment? And then, I mean, you're answering the question.
Where I knew I had to do that, and I did what I needed to, and then it sort of informed a lot of my other radio work and then I created a stage play called Mei Mei, and it was done here, and so yeah, it sort of informed this pathway for me for a while, up until I did Crossing East in 2006, which was 8 hours of Asian American history, and then Secret Asian Woman. And since then, I've just sort of been trying to work on my memoir, and that's like really hard too, and sad. So I took a break from that. Every time you delve into it, people don't realize how much you're just like ripping your heart apart, right? And that's why you need to have the fun stuff. You need to have that balance. You need to do something that's totally, you know, not related to your history. But then again, it's still there, so you have to get back into it. So I think it's just this lifelong, it's a lifelong quest, you know, this identity thing. And if you're an artist, if you're a creative person, I think that's one way to figure it out and to communicate it to other people. And I encourage anybody here to write, to perform, to do, you know, any kind of art. And tell your story, because, you know, it's so different. Every single person's story is so different. And that's what's so wonderful about it. Whether or not you get society to accept that we can all have these stories. Oh, we've done that before, right? I hear that quite often. That's already been done. What do you got next? So, you know, that's the other hard part, is convincing mainstream society that we need to tell all of our stories.
That doesn't stop us from remaking the same damn movie over and over again, does it?
No, it doesn't.
So anyway, so you guys have been makers. I mean, I'm assuming that you were making work long before you were making work that was about identity. So I'm very curious about that point.
You mean, was there a moment
Yeah,
when
where
the work started?
where the work
turning
took on the dimension of really delving into identity.
Um, can Laura go first?
She can.
I gotta think about it.
Okay.
I have an answer. Actually, I graduated, went to school at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and I probably was my first year there. In undergrad, there was a flyer up to be part of some show called Destination, Chicago's first Pan-Asian American art show. I'm like, all right, I'll apply, and ended up being part of this group that was around for about 3 or 4 years. And there were young people, senior citizens, everybody, people who are art school people who are new immigrants, people who are traditional craftspeople. And we all showed together. It was a Pan-Asian American Arts and Cultural Association. And I realized at that moment, the very beginning of sort of my professional art career, what I was not learning in school, what nothing was in the art history books, and how I was meeting these people who are coming from all these different countries. And there's these art worlds going on in Asia and different places that I would never hear about till 10 years later or more, right? And also learning from people who are not just 18 years old. And like what you can learn from all this different collective experience. So that was really pivotal, this learning, this DIY idea too. You know what, go write your book, go make a class, become a professor, make your own organization, make your own gallery, figure it out yourself. And that kind of thing was at the very beginning of my art career, so I'm really blessed with that. Learning how to grant write. Those kind of things I learned. So from that, it's been an evolving process, and I think identity-based work since I was 18 years old has always been there. Of course, I did other stuff before that, but it's kid stuff, so it doesn't count.
Okay, I got it. I'm gonna be really inappropriate. I'm glad my dad's not here, and he will deny this entirely. But I think the first time I ever did any work that had to do with my identity, it wasn't specifically about being a Hapa Yonsei, but I started out. I flew out of a car when I was 16, and there's some dead tissue in my brain. So I was not supposed to go to college. I wasn't supposed to go to graduate school, supposed to do any of that. And I wanted to be an architect, but I could never go to grad school to do that. So I went and was getting a certificate to be a drafter, and we did draw. There was a computer at that time.
AutoCAD.
And that just wasn't good enough for me. I just really wanted to be doing some of my own design. So I started taking art classes at community college, and then I decided, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to go to the UW, and I'm going to try it. And from architecture, I worked at an architecture firm as an administrative person, and I said, I'm just going to go to art school. And my dad was pissed. How are you going to make a living as an artist? An architect has a salary, you know? And he was giving me gifts, like tickets to go see Hiroshima when they were in town. He bought me this beautiful hoppy coat, all these Japanesey things, right? And then that didn't work, so then he didn't talk to me for some time. And then I started making work at that point about the honor system and some of the things that as a child I was so fearful, especially after my accident where my grades weren't very good, but I was the only child of the oldest son and I still needed to get an A, so what classes did I need to take so that I could still be able to do that? And all of this, so I started making work about that, and it wasn't necessarily like who am I identity-wise, but it was sort of part of the cultural aspect that I was loving and rejecting.
Well, that does touch on the model minority thing that you talked about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Does anyone do you have questions for the artists? Do you want to ask them anything? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Flora, and I was born in Panama City, so half of Filipina, and my dad was Norwegian from Minnesota. So I grew up in the Midwest. But I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to two things that you didn't go into that deeply. The first one is, I'm actually kind of waiting for my mom to pass before I write because of what you touched on. I don't think I can. So I just kind of
That's
Good
a
question.
bunch of questions.
We were
That's
actually
great.
discussing this earlier
Yeah, that
because
there aren't
in the, I have a website, blog, everything, and my family follows and watches. So everything that goes out in the world, I need to know, they're going to see it. And I don't put out secrets that should be kept as secrets. Like I would not, I don't do that to my family. Even though there's things I wish I could say out loud, I just personally don't feel comfortable airing the business in public. And that's a choice I've made as an artist. So I just know that this is going to be things that will go in public that they can be there with me and see it together. But also my parents are a love marriage. They met in college, and while on the Okinawan Japanese side, there was not any resistance at all. On my mother's side, it took a while to get used to it because my grandpa served in, World War II, and his daughter married, and his son married a German, and it took a little getting used to. But my parents really sheltered me probably from maybe some of his true views of things until after he passed. I'm kind of grateful that and still sometimes when I find out how somebody really felt, I'm kind of glad I didn't know. I don't know if that's healthy for children to have that sort of pain of rejection. It's not my problem. But in terms of gender, the latest body of work that I had, Sugar, I actually made that for a gallery called Woman Made Gallery in Chicago. And I hadn't specifically explored issues of gender in my work. So that was a series where I was intentionally going back and looking at women's history and labor. But you're right, all women here didn't bring that up.
I think you have to, there's many ways you can navigate that, and there's only one, or there may be many and there may be none that are right for you. I think my best, what I would do would be to not approach it from a factual basis. If you're a writer, I would go toward the novel aspect with fictional characters and talk about a type of person. That said, when I was in grad school, I was dealing with trying to get over some of my own prejudices of, I had learned so much about the World War II incarceration and had my own prejudices against how easy it must have been for my mom's side of the family that didn't have to do that. And I was working through it through my artwork, and I had a show, I remember my mom saw it, and she was so upset. How could you portray my father like that? She said. It wasn't easy for us either, and being authentic. I'm trying to get my feelings out here. I'm trying to work through this, and it was really upsetting to her. And I've just taken it. It doesn't exist anymore. It's just out of there because I feel like even though I had to go through that internally, when I saw what happened to her, I just couldn't do it.
I know I said that we hadn't spoken in 4 years, but actually we did. But we just would keep fighting. So I exaggerate sometimes, but it was painful. It was painful. I mean, there would be periods where she didn't talk to me, and then we'd sort of work our way back together, and it would be fine. And then we'd disagree about something, and then she'd throw May May in my face, So it was like I thought we were over that. So my mom died in 2002, and I've been trying to work on this memoir, and I'm finding it really difficult because it might even be harder because she is gone. And how am I going to, I think about how I'm going to portray her, and is this going to represent her memory? And, I think I have more sentimental thoughts than I did when I was producing raw, gut-wrenching material, So I don't think there's ever a right time. So you either have to write it down or don't. And it's okay not to do, to do either. And that's what I would like to impart to people. However whether or not they need to talk about race or not, it's okay. I don't want to sit in judgment. I think I've been through that too much, whether I was Asian enough or not Asian enough, or, is my work deep enough? Isn't it deep enough? It's okay. Whatever calls to you at that time. But if you're writing something, you may not, you know how long it takes to publish? I've been working on this memoir for a long time. So just write. You don't have to show it to anybody or show it to your friends, but it really helps. If you have something to say, just to create something, it just helps, whether or not you ever show it to anybody or not, you know. So don't let that stop you. And please, that's such bad karma to say I'm going to wait for my parents to pass. My God, I'm so superstitious. Well, see, my dad passed when I was 21 in the early. You know, he was the only one who could have understood my radio work, and I hadn't even. You know, I was still going to college, so I hadn't started it then. And it's like I wish he could have heard Maymay. I wish he could have, because he could have understood. You know, I mean, he probably might have been embarrassed too. And my plays, he probably wouldn't have liked it too. But you know what? My mom, as much as she would throw it in my face, at one point, I remember she came up to Portland from Eugene, and somebody had asked her about me. I don't know, some stranger. And she had a wad of articles about, because she didn't read. You know, that was the other thing, is the only way I could communicate to her was through radio, because she could hear and understand, right? But she didn't read English, and so she had a wad of my Peabody win from the Oregonian articles, and she would pass them out to people. But to me, she would say, "Oh, you're terrible. You're just a terrible person." So there's that thing too. You know about the ghosts, right? You know, like you don't pray your children because the ghosts might take them away. Well, you know.
So Flora, I would say you want to get at the story while you can get at the story, but also I think that actually allowing the story to have a life and have a public appearance means that the conversation gets richer within the family. I mean, I'm just imagining the polarities of, you know, the Latino and the Norwegian. It's just, I mean, I have to say that right there is the grounds for a great story. So I'll bet it is. Well, also being from Minnesota, I know from whence she speaks. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Really feel like I fit in with the Latinos. So it's like, who do I fit in? You know, it's been, you know, my whole life has kind of been a struggle. So I mainly just consider myself as Asian. Like when I'm with my white friends, you know, oh yeah, cool, this Asian guy, you know, just, you know, I'm Asian when I'm with, you know, my white friends. And then if I'm with my Asian friends, they're just, you know, you can fit in with us, but you're not exactly full Asian. And then, you know, with the Latinos, I'm just considered, you know, kind of Asian. You know, not Latino, you know, so it's like, okay, so, wow, I'm nuts. So, but, you know, I'm just considering, I'm asking, like, what do you guys put on your applications, like, for jobs? And
Your name is Colin?
Well, my last name is Collins.
Colin.
My dad is Mexican, and...
You raised three, actually, different issues. One is issues of racial ascription, like what other people ascribe you to, because some of it is not personal choice, right? And you raised the issue of like, how do we negotiate identities in a family, right? Because we may not look like our family members, we have all kind of different structures of partners or however that we may not be the same in a family unit. And then the third thing is, how do you fill out forms? So they're like three, like the big things. In my family, I have a stepdaughter whose mother's Mexican-American and my husband's Ashkenazi Jewish, so, you know, white. And she identifies as Latina most of the time, I think. But she says Hispanic. I wouldn't say Hispanic, I would say that's like what a term she feels more comfortable as is saying that she's Hispanic or Mexican. Not Mexican-American, but that's her terms. And it may change over time. So I've another daughter who is 6, and I've even just in her little life seen her sort of change how she is or isn't identifying, or how she feels like what kind of accent she wants to put on or not, depending on what group she's with. And I've seen both of these girls, one daughter's almost 17, depending on what music she's into, what group she's hanging with, drastically change over time. And I remember thing, and that's all right. But then the forms issue, like for me, it changes depending on what I know the form is going to be used for, right? Whether it's a medical form because I want insurance to cover something, or whether it's a school form or census, like kind of I look at the motivation for that and I choose whatever I think is the best decision. I don't know if that helps answer.
I think the best thing about the forms is I think most forms now you can check all that apply. That is just like my favorite, check all that apply, you know?
Yeah, but where's the funding go for some things? I don't want the funding to go to all that applies sometimes. I want it to go to a specific group.
No, you check each single one, and they're all counted.
Well, and,
That's what I'm
It
hoping.
depends.
and you brought up the 2000 census. So prior to that, I think the box was other, wasn't it? I mean, very unironically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know a Vietnamese American Network of Oregon, VAN?
Yes, I was looking on it. There was like a few. While I've been really busy with my work and stuff like that, so but I know there's things out there. I'm not really hooked up to a lot. But
It's nice to be hooked up, you know, just to know and be able to talk about it, you know, and I think that's one of the best things about social